vaccinated as a volunteer at Jewish Care.
David Lerner?
Got vaccinated as a volunteer at Jewish Care.
First I've heard of it, Carol.
He got vaccinated through Lady Sarah.
The home in Barnet Hospital, or near Barnet Hospital.
Ellis, have you been vaccinated? You're a Jewish Care volunteer.
Yes, not through Jewish Care.
No.
My brother got vaccinated at Nightingale. He's a volunteer there. He got vaccinated as a volunteer.
Yeah.
Well, I've not heard about it. I get the newsletters. Nothing.
Well, I think you might have to be proactive. I think that if you are a volunteer, I know people from Jewish Care, but I think they were proactive. They got the letter from Jewish Care and they went down to their GP and said, I've got this letter, and they got in that way. So I think you might have to be
I've had it anyway.
We did it the other way around. We contacted the volunteers who volunteer in Barnet on face-to-face volunteering and offered them to apply.
Have you not had a vaccination?
Yeah. I had it through the doctors and everything, through the GP. But as far as I know, nobody who I'm in contact with, the volunteers, and I'm in contact with quite a lot, none of them have been offered it through Jewish Care.
Conversations for another time.
Okay.
But if anyone's got any leads, I would like to get vaccinated so I can go.
Well, you want to get vaccinated?
Well, I'll just finish with this. The only reason why now I'm looking to get vaccinated is because I want to, on the occasions where I feel the need to be able to support families when they need, at those difficult times. I want to be able to be with a family in their last moments.
And you can't do it through the United Synagogue?
I've spoken to my local GP. I could even. It's not. They're not interested.
But being vaccinated doesn't give you a permission to do that.
Not necessarily, but it would give me more confidence to do it.
Yeah.
It's not a conversation for now, but it's more the fact that as a rabbi and as someone within the community that people do turn to, especially at end of life issues, amongst others. I want to just have a bit more confidence that I'm not transmitting it as much. Again, transmission, we don't know yet with the vaccine, but there's more of a chance that there's less transmission with the vaccine. So I'm protecting other people and myself. But anyway, not for now. If I could kindly ask you all to mute yourselves just for no unnecessary interruptions, and we shall begin. Welcome back to Belmont for another Q&A. It's been a few weeks since we've done one of these. And with Purim approaching, I have 4 Purim questions for you this evening. One last-minute entry. For that, we will start with Ellis Temmerly has asked me the following question. Let me actually pull the question up. I want to get it right, Ellis, for you. The question is, can we hear the Megillah over the net? I think you mean virtually. Or do we have to, we'll go through, and if so, if we can hear a virtual Megillah reading, why do we not allow a mourner to say Kaddish over these virtual means with 9 others, obviously not on Shabbat or Yom Tov? So Ellis is asking, can you listen to the Megillah over Zoom, for example? And if so, the assumption is yes. And if so, why not a Kaddish? So I'm not going to really go into Kaddish because we've dealt with it several times on the Q&A. But let me explain why yes and then why they're different. Firstly, I've actually finished writing up all the guidelines for our community for Purim, 2 pages of guidelines for this year, for specifics for this year, also because it's an Erev Shabbat, it's a Friday Purim this year. So they are going out, I think, tomorrow or Wednesday for you all to read in your own time and to go through the do's, the don'ts, the ifs, the buts, the ups and downs, and when everything's happening. And on there, I've included the special, not dispensation, but the special psak, the special... what's English for psak? My brain isn't working. The ruling, that's the word, the ruling from the Beth Din from Dayan Geli this year. Dayan Geli has ruled that even though under normal circumstances, we do not listen to the Megillah, fulfilling our requirements to listen and to hear the Megillah of Esther being read on Purim through a microphone or through a virtual device like Zoom or over the telephone, primarily because, and again, we can't go through this now because this will turn into a shir, and this is a Q&A. A shir on this maybe another time. But by virtue of what are you listening to, if you've got to hear the Megillah from someone's voice, once it's going through cyberspace or networks or phone lines or fiber optics or whatever it is, are you genuinely hearing the voice of that person? So if you haven't got the ability to read it yourself, and therefore you're relying on someone else to read it for you, what exactly are you listening to? So under normal circumstances, we don't use a microphone for listening to the Megillah. Nothing to do with Shabbat. Again, this is listening to the Megillah, and we don't listen to it over the phone, and we don't listen to it virtually, etc. However, there are minority opinions that would suggest that such means could be acceptable. We don't rely on them under any normal circumstances. So if our shul is shut, we are closed for business at the moment. Some shuls are open, but we have decided, our community, shul is shut. Therefore, unless I have the ability, one has the ability to be able to listen to, read, or be fulfilling the requirements of Megillah, unless we can do it ourselves, we have to somehow hear it. So either we can convince some lovely Jewish man to come down our streets yelling Megillahs left, right, and centre, like communal chauffeur blowing some communal, standing at the bottom of what's the road where you a load of people live off of Gordon Avenue, Sunny Gardens, is it? We get someone to scream and shout the whole Megillah there and at different points. That's also not going to happen now, especially at 7 o'clock in the morning on the Friday morning. So we're left with a situation almost our hands are tied behind our back. How are we going to listen to Megillah? So in those situations, we could potentially rely on the fact that we could do it over Zoom. So what we have decided this year is we will be doing a Zoom Megillah. Teddy will be reading Megillah for us on the Thursday evening at the right time and on the Friday morning at the right time. He will be live in shul. I'm going to do it from shul with just him and me there because I want the quality of the sound and the picture and everything to be good. So we'll be there, but no one else will be there. If you want to watch it, you have to come over Zoom and listen to it. Are you fulfilling your requirements? We can only hope so, but we're not relying on it. And therefore, I personally, if I'm listening to it over Zoom or you're listening to it over Zoom, you can't make a bracha on it. If he's already fulfilled his requirement to do it, he can't make another bracha if no one else in the room hasn't heard it. So we are relying on minority opinions for this year because we haven't got a choice to do it virtually. That's very different from Kaddish. Kaddish, as we've discussed before, is nothing to do with the bracha, it's to do with the minyan. For something that is a davar shebikdusha, holy matters, holy words, the Aramaic prayers such as Kaddish, which our great sages have told us, for reasons I can't go into now because we've already discussed them and I want to move on to other things. For those things that require minyan, i.e. physical presence of 10 men, virtual doesn't work, doesn't help because we're physically not together. So, which is something different from listening to the Megillah. One's got to do with physical presence, which virtually you're not. We haven't got 10 people. That's Kaddish. And the Megillah is when I listen to fulfill my requirements for the Megillah, is it the voice that I'm hearing through either cyberspace or the phone line or whatever it might be? What am I hearing? Am I hearing just reconstituted sounds or am I hearing the actual voice? That's a conversation. And our rabbis lean on the side of caution and therefore don't rely on it under normal circumstances. I've been to weddings where they won't allow a microphone for the brachot under the chuppah, for the brachot, because a minyan should hear the blessings from the kol, from the voice of the person saying them, and they don't want to rely on that on the opinion. It's different for a wedding. We don't worry about that generally, but I've been to such weddings. So, Ellis, I hope that answers your question as to why we can this year, why it's different from Kaddish, why we don't rely on it normally. Anyone got any questions on this specific issue? I am coming out with Purim guidelines in the next day or two with all the different things about Matanat Le'Evyonim, how we're going to give gifts to the poor. I'm suggesting we majorly limit our giving out to Mishloach. Well, not this year. We shouldn't be traipsing around, going after family, after person, after household, giving out gifts. These aren't essential activities. I'm suggesting we give, but give minimally, and such things are coming out. Any questions specifically on this?
Thank you.
Pleasure. Okay, that's Purim question number one. I've got a few questions, but we'll just start with the Purim ones because they're the ones that are a bit more appropriate for time. So here's a nice question. So we have this custom that has come about over the years. I'm just going to make sure everyone's muted because I'm getting a bit of feedback. 1 second. There we go. A bit of feedback. It's gone. So there's a custom that's come down over the years that when we get to Haman, it's a cue to boo, right? When we get to Haman in Megillah, we boo, we stamp our feet. And what are we trying to achieve when we do that? We're trying to obliterate Amalek, the evil nation, Haman. That's what we do when we hear the Megillah. In fact, if you look at the guidelines that I've come out with, I've got a whole line in there that says when we listen to it virtually, we will not be booing virtually. A, because you don't have to. It's a nice custom that we do. It's fun. It's for the kids. But we won't be doing it on Zoom for various reasons, let alone how disruptive it is. And also, we want to get it done, especially as we're not all going to be there together. But so the question is as follows. It's all very well we do that. But why do we not do that when we mention Amalek, the evil nation, or any evil character throughout Tanakh? So we're reading in the Torah portion, not the one just gone Yitro, but Bashalach, the week before that, at the end of Parshas Bashalach, Amalek, this evil nation, the one that Haman comes from, sets upon Bnei Yisrael. There's a war. Boom. They have a war, and Bnei Yisrael defeat Amalek, and then they weaken them, and that's the end of the war. So we talk about Amalek. When it comes to Zachor, right? We won't be in Shul, unfortunately. I have to talk about that next week or the week after. Next week. Sorry, 2 weeks' time. 10 days when it comes to Pasha Zachor, which is the mitzvah for us to obliterate the name, the memory, and the being of Amalek, and we read a special maftir for that. Why don't we, when it says Amalek there, boo and stamp our feet in shul? It's a good question. I'd never thought about this before. So sometimes the question is better than the answer. I will say like this. Firstly, the idea that we do it on Purim, it's not a world thing. People do it, and people all over the world do it. I've been in plenty of minyanim that do it. I've been in plenty of Megillah readings that don't do it. So just because we do it on Purim doesn't mean we should do it when we read the Torah. So I'd actually flip the question over, and I'd say to you, why do we do it on Purim? Because clearly it's not appropriate that we do it in any other place. I've never been to a shul where they start booing in the middle of a Kriyas Torah because we're reading an interesting part. I have heard the Baal Korah, the person laning, emphasize and dramatize the laning, which actually I'm quite for when it's done tastefully and appropriately, because it helps to bring alive the stories, the episodes, and the characters that the people that we're reading about. When it comes to the harsh stuff, the bad stuff, the complaining, the miracles, whatever it might be, we have the notes, we have the trop over the laning, which is supposed to highlight whatever's going on. When it's done with a bit of feeling, passion, then that all the more so. But we don't find anywhere where we react to that. Because why? For sure, it's disrespectful to do it during Kriyat Torah. When the Sefer Torah, with all its holiness, is open, it's not for us to start interrupting and booing it. So why is Megillah different? Well, we could argue that reading from Megillah is a piece of parchment, which is very different from reading from a Torah, even though an actual Megillah written properly does have the same sanctity, similar sanctity. It's not exactly Torah. It's not, if you drop a Megillah, you don't fast. If you drop a Sefer Torah, you would fast. But when it comes to Purim, and I think this is the answer that it's definitely the answer I'm going to give, unless anyone wants to challenge me on it. But why we do it in Purim is because there is an element of the day that is lighthearted. There is an element of the day that Purim is a different day. We treat it differently. We act differently. We dress up. We don't normally do that. We drink in shul, which is something that we should rarely do for the rest. We don't necessarily drink in shul, but we focus the Purim celebrations around drinking and eating, and in a way in which is different from all the other festivals. So it is appropriate to make noise and to have fun and to remove ourselves from the normality and almost the seriousness that we conduct ourselves in shul on this one day a year. In fact, many years ago, when I was out I remember I was in Beitar, I think it was in Beitar, outside Yerushalayim, going to one of my Rebbes when I was way back in my single days in yeshiva, and they were like climbing the streets and going crazy. And I remember saying to him, I don't really understand. This is like frum behavior to see these kids like nicking cigarettes and drinking shots back. I'm like, what is going on? And he looked at me. Whether you agree with this or not, this is what he said. He said, you know what? It's one day a year. These kids don't get much freedom or expression for 364 days a year. One day a year, if this is their this is their one day to kind of let loose. Now, I don't agree with that. I think it should be a bit more moderated, and that's how, with God's help, we're trying to bring our kids up a little bit more balanced in terms of how we let them express themselves in the world. But there is a difference in the day of Purim, unlike the other days of the year. So that's my answer to that. It's a good question. As I say, sometimes the question is better than the answer. Next, third Purim question. Why can Purim be one of the happiest holidays in the Jewish calendar when the Jews in the times of King Achashverosh and the story of the Megillah, which we read, if you look at the 9th chapter, right towards the end of the Megillah, they went to war. There was a whole huge battle after the story basically finished. There's a huge battle of which 75,000 people, enemies of Bnei Yisrael, were killed in that war. So there's this big battle, lots of people, 75,000, a lot of people died. So therefore, how can this be such a joyous, happy, fun festival? Yes, we celebrate, I'm just sort of paraphrasing the question. Yes, we celebrate the Jews that were saved with Mordechai and with Esther and the plot, but so many people paid the price with their lives. How can it be we celebrate it in such a way? Again, a question I hadn't necessarily thought of when it's put like this, but this is something that I think is important for us to realize. Firstly, when we celebrate the joys, we just spoke about the frivolity of the festival. When we celebrate the festival, we are not celebrating people dying. And we're not specifically celebrating the battle. In that first year, historically, the celebrations come after the battle has finished, but it's not because of the battle. The celebrations come specifically because of the miracle that happened, that gods overturned this decree against Bnei Yisrael, overturned this decree of Haman, of Amalek, and all the evil in the world, flipped it on its head, and the Jews became victorious. That's what we celebrate. And from there bears out the celebrations, the parties, the gift giving, the giving to the poor, the Megillah, the Suddahs, the meals. Everything comes from the fact that we try and peel away the layers of our understanding of what goes on in the world. We see what's hidden from us, i.e. God's hand, when we can't necessarily see it or feel it. And we try and tap into that depth that God runs the world. And the fact that it's all b'yedei Hashem, kol b'yedei Shemaim, everything is in his hand. And that's what we're celebrating on Purim. Now, it's important for us to say, in fact, I'll strengthen the question with a different answer. I'll say that when it comes to something like Pesach, Pesach's a good example. Throughout the Pesach story, you see Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, becoming free. They are being raised on a pedestal throughout the story, and as the plagues get more and more severe, Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people, get more and more liberated and closer to freedom, and eventually walking through the Yam Suf, walking through the Sea of Reeds, and then they get to the other side, and the Egyptians go in, and the waves crash down on them. A lot of people died there as well. There was much pain and suffering in Mitzrayim, and that is reflected on how we view the second half of Pesach, Hallel, the beautiful tefillot and prayers and singing of Hallel that we have on Yom Tov and throughout Chol HaMoed and towards the end of Pesach. We limit our Hallel on the days that follow the Yetziat Mitzrayim, coming out of Egypt, because we're sensitive to the fact that people died. So again, the question of the fact that so many people died for us to become victorious and free in the Purim story is reason for us to be sensitive. But we're not celebrating those deaths. We are celebrating the overturning of the decree that we should be wiped out. So that's how I want to answer that question. Any follow-up to that one? Or can I move on with the last Purim question? You're getting a Purim shit, and then we'll move on to other things as well. We've got time. So this one. How does one explain? Oh, this is a complicated one. Here we go. How does a person explain the fact that Queen Esther married a non-Jew when it is written, and it's very clear from Torah, that we shouldn't marry Gentiles? Furthermore, how does one explain that the Jewish people actually benefited from this intermarriage? Meaning that the whole story of salvation comes from Esther, a nice Jewish girl, marrying a non-Jewish king. If God wanted to create this incredible story for us, why does the redemption have to come through these channels, from this journey, from that path? So, wow, how long we got? Again, this is not a sheer. This is not a sheer, but this is something that it's important for us to understand. Let's. By the way, we can strengthen the question. We can strengthen the question if we want to look at what the Gemara says. The Gemara says that actually Esther, one opinion of the Gemara says that Esther, what was her relationship to Mordechai? They were husband and wife. So not only did she marry a non-Jewish king, she was already married. which has its own problems as well. So what's going on here? And this raises a fascinating question. The conclusion is what she did, she had to do because there was an evil decree against Bnei Yisrael. Mordechai, in his wisdom as a prophet, sees this as the only get out of jail. The only way that we can overturn this with prayer, with tefillah, with our own avodah as well, our own ishtadlus, our own hard work and fasting and teshuvah and everything that Bnei Yisrael had to take upon themselves as well. That was on their heads. But he foresaw that the only way that they could get out of this through this direction was for her to get herself embedded into the palace, into the malchus, the kingship, the monarchy of Achashverosh. So therefore, he sent her to go and get married. He sent her to get into the malchus of Achashverosh, into the kingship into the monarchy of Achashverosh. So this was something that had to be done. Now that opens up a huge can of worms, because where do we see that you can do what's called an aveira, a prohibition, lishma, for the sake of heaven? I think we might have even discussed this before. Can you do an aveira? Can you commit a prohibited act for the sake of heaven, to teach a lesson? Can you do that? And really, Chazal, our sages, when you look through the Gemara sugiyas of those issues, turn around and say, no, that's not a good thing. Even if you've got the best of intentions, a sin is a sin is a sin is a sin. If it looks like a sin, walks like a sin, it's a sin. And sins are not for us. They are bad. They distance us from God and from creation and from spirituality and from righteousness. And they put a big stumbling block in front of us when it comes to that. So how could it be that Esther committed the sin? And I say sometimes the question is better than the answer. The answer in this situation was that her act was permitted. Her act was an act of, I don't want to say pikuach nefesh, but she put herself on the line. She put herself in a situation of pikuach nefesh, if you want, for the sake of Bnei Yisrael, and that's what she did. I would put a big disclaimer: don't try this at home. You have to be a prophet to put yourself into that situation, or know a prophet, or be married to a prophet, or have a prophet in the family to be put into that situation and to be able to know what you're doing and how to do it. But we see there's a necessity for her to do that. So that answers the question of how could it be that she could do it? It was allowed. There was a prophecy that she could do it. Why it came through that way, why the story of Purim comes through this act, why are we almost celebrating it? That's, I think, a much more difficult question, and a similar theme to what we've already said before when it comes to Purim. The whole idea of Purim is that things happen for a reason. We can't see the reasons behind it. There is a layer of a story of life that is being weaved together by the hand of God. For us to be able to see it, for us to put those glasses on, it takes a lot of hard work, a lot of effort, and a lot of faith. But we can't see it. But we have to know that everything that happens for a reason, and it happens for the overall good for us. So even though this seemingly difficult intermarriage story that comes from, I wouldn't choose that to write the book about that, but it came that way. It's just another level of it. This is coming from God. And it's not how we understand things, but that's how it works. And that's a big part of the faith and revealing what's hidden of the story of Purim. They're the Purim questions. Anything, the rules are only on what I've related to what I've said so far. I've got a couple more questions that would be nice to deal with before. Anyone want to raise anything or anything I've said so far? 5. Perfect. Right, we go on. Feel free to unmute if you've still got those questions. So what's the time? You got Kayach for a few more questions? Someone nod, say something, smile, shake your head. Yeah, okay. You're on mute, so you have to send some kind of sign back to me. Here we go. Michael Swan asked me, can a moil perform his Brit Milah procedure on Shabbat and Yom Tov if needed? Thank you, Michael, for that excellent question. So we know there's a mitzvah in Torah given to Abraham that on the 8th day of a boy's life, he enters into the covenant, or we have to enter. It was his first mitzvah in a passive capacity, right? He gets no say in the matter. But we enter him into the covenant with God. we enter him. Did I receive? Yes. There's another Purim question. Thank you, Bernard. It came quite last minute. I will come back to that in a second. I'll do this first and we'll come back to yours. The Torah tells us Abraham has to enter into the bris, into the covenant with God. And then after that, on the 8th day of every boy's life, a Jewish boy, they have to enter into the bris as well. It's the covenant, and we have a bris milah. So that's what the Torah says. So the question is, what if the 8th day falls on a Shabbos or a Yom Tov? So it happens, and it happens a lot, that the 8th day falls on a Shabbos or Yom Tov. And anyone here ever been to a bris on a Shabbos or Yom Tov? So Michael, in short,
yes. Sorry, sorry, I come on now. I'll appear. My eldest son had his brit on Shabbat.
Oh, there you go.
The mole was a Reverend Block. He's not here anymore. He's passed away. And he walked from Scanmore to Pinner. North Harrow, because I lived in North Harrow at the time, with his daughter. He came beforehand, and we had to prepare everything before.
Oh, don't steal my share.
Sorry. So the wine was opened and everything was ready before Shabbat. But he actually walked on Shabbat with his daughter. Performed a and walked back.
Yeah, my grandson was on Shabbat in Bushy.
There you go, Bushy. My father had his bris on Rosh Hashanah, as he's just sent me in the text. Dad, nice to see you on. I
went to a bris on Shabbos and Yom Kippur in South Africa. We had it in the shul.
There you go. So Michael, the answer is yes. Would you like to hear why? Why is it? Because essentially, this is a fascinating topic. Again, another shift for another time. But this is where it's not that the Torah contradicts itself, but you've got two commands in Torah that seemingly contradict itself. There is a command in Torah that says on the 8th day of a child's life, you have to give a bris. And you also have a command that says that you have to keep Shabbos. And in the laws of keeping Shabbos is you can't cause a wound, you can't cause it to bleed, you can't sharpen the knife. There's many malachot involved in a Brit Milah, or a few malachot actually, depends how much you do before Shabbat. But essentially, there's definitely a couple of malachot that would be involved in a Brit Milah. So when one says you can, one says you should do, and one says you can't do, which one do you follow? Now, normally, we probably err on the side of caution and stick with the things you shouldn't do, because it's safer to not do the things you shouldn't do than to do the things you should do, if that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, I'll say it slowly one more time. It makes more sense logically to not do something you shouldn't do than to do something you should do. I think that makes sense. However, Baruch Hashem, we have great sages that thought about this long before we came around. The Gemara talks about this. The Gemara says the mitzvah of bris milah appears twice. It appears here by Abraham, and it appears later on in the book of Vayikra. I think it's Parshas Tazria. Sorry, one of those two. I think it comes in then. And the Gemara says the fact that it brings the mitzvah twice emphasizes the fact that regardless of the day, the 8th day takes priority. The 8th day, even if it's on a Shabbos, the bris happens. And that's what Chazal basically rules, but with two major exceptions. Number one, if the bris has been delayed, meaning, and it happens, jaundice or ill health, God forbid, of the baby, and therefore it's not deemed acceptable, appropriate, or safe for the bris to happen on the 8th day, and therefore now you've already pushed the bris off, we don't bris on a Shabbos, right? So even though we should do the bris as soon as possible, if the mole comes around on Friday morning and says, you know what, another day and the baby's good and kosher and ready to go, Mahadran, let's go, let's do it. And the next day is a Shabbos, you still shouldn't do it on Shabbos, you wait till the Sunday. So that's rule number one. I mean, difference between, when we lived in Israel for all those years, there was rarely a bris push. I mean, the baby would have to be glowing fluorescent yellow for the bris not to happen. Here, if the baby kind of has a tinge of yellow, I'm not criticizing one or praising the other. I'm just saying, rarely was a bris pushed off in Israel. I moved to London 10 years ago, and rarely is a bris ever on the 8th day when you look at it like that. But so that's the first thing. If the bris has already been moved off, we won't allow it on the Shabbos. And number two, depending on the circumstances of the birth, then there are situations where we don't use the 8th day on for a Shabbat. For example, I think if it's a C-section, what they're called? C-section. That's the American version, though. you know what I'm trying to say, cesarean, that's the one. So there are situations, again, consult your local Orthodox rabbi for the specifics of it, but there are situations where we don't bris on the 8th, we don't do a bris on the 8th day. And as Lynn started to say, sorry I interrupted you, even when it's allowed, we would insist, where possible, the male to be as prepared as possible. So to leave the stuff in a place where it wouldn't be needed to be carried, to minimize the actual malachot. So, for example, preparing bandages, those should be done in advance. It's not so pashut, by the way, because if you are a busy mile and you might have 2 or 3 brisim to do on a particular Shabbos in different areas, you do not necessarily have 2 or 3 briskets. There's a joke in there somewhere. What meat does a mile have a brisket? No, sorry. Just made that up. So it's not always so simple, but yes, we do insist on the limited amount of Chilul Shabbat when it comes to preparing the bris. But there you go, that's the bris question. Bernard jumped in last minute after the deadline, I think, with another Purim question asked, and I'm just going to pull it up on my emails. I did remember seeing it now. Oh, I lie, Bernard, I apologize. Michael, the email came at 1 minute to 6. And the 6 o'clock deadline. So I genuinely apologize. But the question is as follows. Seeing that Purim this year is on a Friday, Thursday night Friday in a couple of weeks, do you need to have meat at the Purim Seder? And which Seder, which meal has more significance or importance? Purim meal on the day of Friday or Friday night meal that's going to follow on that night? Now, it's amazing that it rarely happens that a Purim falls out on a Friday. In fact, I believe it was 13 years ago, which was the last time this happened. I'm not sure when the next one is. We could probably Google it, but it's not very common, which brings about a few, not lots, but a few challenges, because Purim, for myself, is always an insanely busy day because there's umpteen hundred and mishlach we're not to give out. Not this year, as explained before. And also, there's lots of matanot le'evyonim, gifts to people that need gifts, and financial help that is given out, plus all the Megillah and the collections that go on, plus having a su'udah, a meal, a festive meal where one sits down and breaks bread and drinks wine and eats meat. That is supposed to happen on a Purim. Now, is there a chiyuv? Is there an obligation to eat meat at that Purim Seder? No. Do we make it into a Shabbos or Yontif meal? For the most part, we usually do. This year, our Purim plans for the community is, it's a Friday, so we're having and you're all invited to the Levine family Purim brunch Su'udah on that Friday morning. Little plug, as you've asked Bernard. It's 11:30. What we've done is we've approached Grudzinski's in Edgware, and they're going to be preparing for a bargain price of £8 a box, your very own Belmont Grudzinski brunch box for Purim. So all you have to do, and this is all coming out, I think it's tomorrow, if not Wednesday, all you have to do is order in advance through our website and pay for your brunch box. Come to the shul car park for 1 hour on that Friday morning between 10 and 11. And at 11:30 in the morning, you have to wash before halachic midday, which is about 12:15. So between 11:30 and 12:30, we're going to be hosting in our house a virtual Purim Seder for anyone in the world that wants to join. Come to Belmont to join us. We're going to have a few fun, a few games, a few l'chaims, even at 11:30 in the morning. But we can all have the same food because we're all going to be brunching together. You don't have to get the food brunch to join with us. And if you've got your own family things to do or your own friends things to do, go and enjoy. But yes, one should have a Purim Seder before lunchtime, wash at least before lunchtime, and still have your delicious Friday night supper and dinner. Which one's more important? There is much more to say, I imagine, there's much more to say about honouring Shabbos over honouring Purim in terms of the food that you put in there. We equate them, but if you only, there is no line in the Gemara or in the Halacha that says if you only have enough money for your Purim Seder, I don't think there is, enough money for your Purim meal or your Shabbos meal, which one takes priority? I would say it's a Friday morning, have your egg sandwiches, or smoked salmon, bagels, and cream cheese, whatever you want to have on the Friday morning, and have your fleisch, brisket, whatever you want to have on chicken on the Friday night, and chopped liver, and do it that way. But I would say Shabbat the Oneg, the delight and the kavod that we put on Shabbat shouldn't be diminished So one should make sure they wash early enough to have an appetite to have a proper Friday night meal on that evening. Bernard, does that answer your question? Is Bernard even on? I think you are. I think I saw. Yes,
Thank you.
Pleasure. So that's. I've got a few more questions, but I'll save them for next week. Not pouring questions. Barbara and David. But I will say that anyone want to ask, raise, or throw something at me from anything we've discussed until now? You have to unmute yourself, Doreen. Or are you just waving?
Go on.
What's inside the box? So we haven't prepared.
Now that's a question after my own heart. What's inside the box? Well, I hope food. No, that I do know, but Barbara's waving at me. So Barbara,
you say.
No, well,
okay. So two mini bagels, hummus and crudités, fruit salad, and 2 Hamantaschen. And if you are unable to come to shul to pick it up, we will arrange COVID-safe delivery.
Okay.
There you go. Thank you, Barbara. Yeah, so we want everyone to join. So just come together, have a l'chaim. Definitely, I think it's also important that we try, if we can, to support our local businesses as well. They all need our support during this time. But any other questions? Purim or unrelated? No? Everyone's just chilled. Well, it's been lovely to see you all. Thank you for joining. Don't forget, by the way, not only are we doing the Purim Suda, we are having a Purim Spiel on the Thursday evening. So all the timings, all the instructions are coming out. But just while I've got you and Facebook, we've got the Megillah that's going to be happening, I believe, at about 6:15 on the Thursday evening, of which before that, a little dramatic presentation from the youth of the community that's going to be pre-recorded. Then there's the Megillah. Then there is a little break for anyone that wants to go and have their supper. Or if you're from the North, tea. And then at about 8:30, I think, we're having a Purim Spiel organised by the incredibly talented Russell Kett. And I've had I'm privy to a little insight into some of the plans, and actually quite funny. Quite entertaining. So we should be all enjoying that. And on the Friday morning, as we said, Megillah about 8 o'clock, an opportunity to pick up your brunch box, and then 11:30 Su'udah, and then it'll be Shabbat. So be interesting to get it all done, but that's that. So, and then loads more planned. There's a Purim shit also. Lisa on the Monday evening will be giving a pre-Purim class on the Monday evening, so look out for that. And lots more things going on for Purim, and after and before and during. So any more questions? Anyone want to say anything, ask anything? Great. Well, as they say, that's it from me. That's it from anyone else? And have a lovely evening. Thank you for joining. Tomorrow night, by the way, an amazing talk that David Lerner's organised.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Amazing talk tomorrow night that you should definitely tune in for. It's a story about someone that was unfortunately very involved in what happened with Mengele, and I think it's the person that I can't remember. David Lerner's found a fascinating speaker, so that's something to watch out for tomorrow evening. Can't remember the top of my head, but yes, tune in for that one. And Matzmid continues with a new course on kashrus. I'll be looking at how easy or difficult it is to trafe up your kitchen from the sources. So there you go. Something to look forward to on Wednesday night. All the very best, my dearest friends. And
bye. 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 Bye.